Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. I posted a reaction to the news story about Jeanette McCurdy publishing the book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. And Britt said, I am one of those people who felt relief and closure, among other things, when my parent died. Thank you for validating us, Dr. Honda. And if you're out there and have felt the same way, big hugs to you. Yeah. Thanks, Britt, for reaching out to others. And also, I'm sorry you went through that. And I'm sorry that you also go through potentially oppression from people who will shame you for having normal feelings about an abusive parent. Hunter Moore, I published a bunch of episodes about that. Kelly says, I'm so thankful that people like Jennifer Lawrence and the women that spoke out had the courage to speak and help make change. Yeah, absolutely. The pressures put on people, particularly women, to remain silent or to go along with the misogyny are far greater than the pressures otherwise. And so for Jennifer Lawrence to actually say, no, why are you doing this? You are the bad people. The bad people stole the pictures, and bad people are looking at the pictures because they know they're stolen. So y'all are immoral, and y'all have to look at yourself in the mirror. I did nothing wrong. So yeah, good for her. Gladys said, after years of watching Dr. Honda now, I'm realizing that watching a smart, caring, emotionally intelligent man talking has been a corrective experience for me. So healing. Thank you, Dr. Honda. Yeah. So, Gladys, thanks. And I'm glad for you. But I also want to highlight this, that for all of us, we have been through relational traumas to some degree, some much more than others, right? And in order to heal and change and alter our personalities in a way that we have less reactivity and maybe attracted to the right kinds of people romantically, or know our own assertiveness, know our own feelings, our own needs, we have to have corrective experiences. And we often will seek these out organically, but we can seek them out intentionally. And also, you want to, when you have a corrective experience in your spouse or your therapist or a professor or something, or a friend, you want to absorb it. You want to recognize it. Part of my therapy with people is not only providing a corrective experience for them, but also helping them to recognize that it is and to internalize it as such. Because we will put up walls, and even though a corrective experience is happening that could be helping us to heal and help us to change our working model of self and others to be more positive, we will reject it internally and thus won't benefit from it. So I'm glad, Gladys, that you are allowing that to happen, because that means that you're actually healing. And you can have a corrective experience from a YouTuber. I will watch YouTube commenters, and people in the media, and hope that they will say something, have a certain take on something, and then they do, and it actually is corrective for me, because all of us have been burned in those kinds of ways. And to hear someone that we respect or that we like to have an opinion, it's like, okay, it feels better. It's like, okay, I guess I can trust other people. I can trust my own takes on things. Beverly says, growing up during this time, with the Hunter Moore time, what was his website called? I forget. Growing up during this was so toxic to me as a woman in society. I was a preteen when this website was popular. Yeah, Beverly, I can't imagine being, because I was 30, no, I was 40 when this website came out. And so I had already developed as a human and was also a therapist, and had been for a long time, and a professor. So when this website came out, I could see it for what it was. But if you're preteen, it's not uncommon for a 13-year-old to start to reject their parents, to start to reject authority. And then you go to the internet and this sort of stuff is happening. It's like, well, these are the people I'm supposed to be emulating. These are my people, and this is all happening, and that makes it all okay. Yeah, it's pretty awful. Dear says, I almost forgot how crazy this time was on the internet. Honestly, disgusted with myself for going on this site, even though I was young. Me and my friends used to consume the most horrible misogynistic things and think nothing of it. This was also coinciding with the first rise of the not like other girls mentality. So we were thinking to ourselves that those girls chose to have those pictures displayed, and they were terrible people for doing that. Yeah, it's interesting, dear, that just 10 years ago, that's how our society was and how the internet was, and how far we've come and how far we have to go, but how quickly things can change. And I think I said this in the reaction video, that if you had asked me when the revenge porn website was popular, I would have said like 20 plus years ago. It was just 2012, which, to me feels like yesterday. So, wow. And of course it's still happening, but just not in that way. Sarah says, this has made me rethink my opinion. So I think Sarah in this episode was referring to the commentary that I was providing regarding that one woman who was providing she had kids, and she was also providing pictures on the internet, and how I was saying there's nothing wrong with that. Plenty of pornography content providers on the internet have children, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not inherently harmful to children. Can it be harmful to their children? Yeah, but a lot of occupations that a parent could have could be potentially harmful to a child. But anyway, so Sarah's saying, this has made me rethink my opinion. I have always had the opinion, don't take nude photos, don't even risk it. I still somewhat think sharing nudes with your face is a bit silly, but you've made me realize anyone should be able to do what they want. Yeah. Legs Fall Off Girl says, watching this series with you has been the hardest of anything you have ever covered before for me. Reading comments in the comment section like, I'm not saying these girls are stupid, but, or I don't believe in slut shaming, but, so apparently people are saying that in the comment section. It feels even worse to read victim blaming statements that are dressed up in the language of kindness. Yeah, I see this on the internet too. People will be like, they sort of know that maybe they're kind of slut shaming, but they still believe they're right. Or they're like, well, I know this might sound like victim blaming, but I'm not blaming a victim, but she shouldn't have taken those pictures to begin with. You're just like, it's that people and their denial and their indoctrination into a particular mindset is interesting. Elizabeth says, your analogy for victim blaming, where you mentioned the police blaming the victim for being in the wrong area when they were attacked, really hit home with me. So I was giving an analogy of just like, imagine that you are, I think I was saying you're mugged in the middle of the mall or something. And the police come up and say just like, well, why were you walking in the mall with your purse? Like, it's your fault that you were attacked. And you're just like, so I can't walk in the mall with my purse? Like, it's my fault that someone targeted me with that criminal activity? Even if anyway. So Elizabeth says, I had a similar situation happen and have never been validated as to the fact that it was not my fault that I was randomly attacked. I really appreciate you making these videos. Yeah, we have a whole system of victim blaming in our society. It's very robust and it's internalized. And then one of the most profound healing steps that someone can take after being assaulted is the realization truly in their heart that it wasn't their fault. A lot of people, because of the internet and shifts in our society, will intellectually know that, because there are people that not only in their heart believe that it's their fault, but they actually intellectually believe it's their fault as well, because that's what we're being told. But there's a fair amount of education, a fair amount of awareness that a lot of people for years will intellectually say, well, no, it wasn't my fault. Of course it's not my fault. That's victim blaming. They'll have all the things to say, but in their heart, they still very much believe it's their fault. And it's hard to uncover, but it's always kind of nagging at them. And so a big part of recovery is to actually get at that. And so if you actually say to if you were assaulted and you actually know, in quotes, that it wasn't your fault, I would continue to investigate that, because that's great and that's a step. But a bigger, more important recovery step is to really internalize that it was not your fault. You could walk down the street naked saying, I don't know, I'm horny or something. And if someone attacks you, that is on them. They are the criminal. For example, if I were to see someone like that and say I wasn't married or something, I wouldn't attack the person, right? Like, people understand the line and the difference between non-consensual and consensual activity like that. So just because you're in that exaggerated, hypothetical, it's still the criminal assault. Now, of course, everyone is not in that situation. They're just, maybe they were dressed a little provocatively or something, or they were drunk and maybe they wanted to make out with the guy, but they didn't want to be assaulted by the guy, So it's like, well, I was attracted to him and I did go back to his apartment. So it's kind of my fault, right? And of course, a lot of people in society would believe that, but it's just like, no. At a certain point, you probably gave some indication, verbally or non-verbally, or didn't provide any kind of affirmative consent. You provided that. And for them to push past that or not to make sure, they are the criminal. Someone walks up to you in the middle of the mall and punches you in the face, that's on them. They're the criminal. It's their fault. 110% their fault, not your fault. You did nothing wrong. There was nothing about that situation that said, well, I kind of brought it on myself. I don't know if I provided this analogy, but a similar thing will happen when your car is broken into. So when in Seattle anyway, I think we have more than the average car break-ins, at least historically. And not that we have high crime, but we have high that kind of crime. Anyway, so if you ever have your car broken into in Seattle, since it's kind of well known, there will be this, you'll tell your friends, oh, my car was broken into. It's really hard. They broke the window and they took all my stuff. The very first question that people will ask you is, did you leave a bag out? Did you leave anything visible? And I'm just like, even if I did, how about some freaking, I want to swear, validation? Because that's victim blaming. Now, if you say to someone, oh my God, that sucked, it's like, what a criminal act. Why would they do that to you? I went through that once, and then at the very end, you're just like, so, I don't know, just a little tip, but not that it's your fault, of course, but, maybe if your bag was out, a little tip I've heard is, and I try to follow, is to not leave anything visible, because that's an attraction for these kinds of criminals. Not your fault. That's okay. But I'm telling you, if your car is broken into, if you're in Seattle, the very first question they will ask is, did you have a bag out? Well, and that's all. And then you're like, well, yeah, my gym bag was in my back seat. People will be like, oh, well, you're not supposed to do that. So it's the victim's fault that someone criminally walked up to the car and said, I'm going to vandalize this car and steal their stuff. That kind of mentality is in all sorts of arenas of crime. And it's like another thing you'll hear is someone will be murdered in a bar fight or something. And you get a little bit more detail, and there was some arguing going on, maybe some pushing. Two guys in a bar, they start yelling at each other, they start pushing. One guy pulls out a gun, shoots him. And it's like, well, you shouldn't get in a fight. You shouldn't push someone around. It's like, well, we understand that pushing, it's not okay. That's probably criminal. But the escalation of shooting to murder is not okay. It's not reasonable reaction to a situation like that, So, that's not very frequent. But I bring this up because it's in a lot of arenas. And if you need to recover fully, because I'll talk with lots of clients, and maybe 2 or 3 years in, we'll finally get to that core feeling in their heart that they were to blame, and they'll finally start to really dismantle that and, really cry and really go, oh my God, I think I was always blaming myself, but I didn't. It's weird because it's not your fault, so you kind of almost gaslight yourself into believing that you no longer feel that way, even though you do. And so it's almost like this cloud or this fog that obscures the reality of what you really believe, because in your mind you're like, well, of course it's not my fault. So I'm not saying that it's down there with everyone, but it might be worth discovering. And I suppose the signs would be low self-esteem, thinking that you're always in danger. Like that's another thing that you'll find that people will think like, well, I need to, like I heard it from a client one time that she was assaulted while wearing not a provocative outfit, but you could see some skin. She was wearing shorts essentially. And from that point forward, she never wore shorts again. And it was almost this unconscious decision she made. Now, she doesn't have to wear shorts, but that's a sign of this heuristic the individual developed, like as they're dressing and heading out the doors, it's like, oh, well, I don't wear shorts. And they might even start making things like, well, my skin is very pale and it's not good to wear shorts, or I don't like wearing shorts. There might even be these, again, the goal is not to wear shorts, but it's look for those signs in yourself as indications that maybe you haven't actually recovered fully. And obviously therapy can help. Cami says, I will admit I grew up around victim blaming mindset and somewhat believed in it. Even when abuse happened to me, I still had a distorted opinion of it being my fault. I questioned my sanity for a while. It took a long time for me to move away from the mindset, but I'm thankful I'm finally free from it. It is so important to see someone like Dr. Honda talking about how messed up it is to blame the victim. It brings me hope that more people like myself are finding the right path and breaking the cycle of abuse. Yeah, Cami, I'm glad for you. Alicia McIntyre, one of the three Alicias, says he wouldn't have stopped. So Hunter Moore wouldn't have stopped if he could monetize the site. Is that what it was? Was that he couldn't monetize? I mean, I could see that, right? Because what advertiser would want to monetize that? Hunter reminds me of Alex Jones in that he doesn't care as long as he is making money. The difference is that Jones has managed to get paid for harassing others, but Hunter could not. That was why he dropped the project, not fear of the repercussions. Oh, interesting. So yeah, that was saying maybe he actually canceled the site because he was afraid of the repercussions. And what Alicia is saying is no, and because he was saying he shut down the website because he cared about human beings. And I was saying, well, he probably just feared repercussions. And other people were saying that too. Alicia's saying, no, he dropped it because he couldn't make money off of it. Natalie says, I guess I am Machiavellian because I went on a tangent and talked about how I am not Machiavellian. I'm whatever is the opposite, because when I would have to eat food I didn't like, it just never occurred to me to feed it to the dog, which would have been pretty easy for me to do. And Natalie says, I guess I am Machiavellian because I would chew my food, and when no one was looking, I would put it in a paper napkin, squish it into a ball, then fling it to the far end of the living room behind a small tree we had in the corner. And then after dinner, I collected it and threw it in the garbage. Ugh, somehow that really is something to picture. My sister followed me and did the same thing, except for some reason she stuffed the paper napkin balls in the back of the refrigerator. Well, you're not going to be able to get it back there. Then one day my mom found all these balls and the gig was up. I then had to use milk to swallow my food whole without tasting it. Otherwise, we were literally at the table until 11 o'clock, sometimes falling asleep at the table, where my mom would take the food and make us try to eat it again the next day. She wasn't a bad cook. We were just tired of rice and beans every day. Wow. I mean, one, to be clear, you're not Machiavellian in the clinical sense. Was that act Machiavellian? Maybe a little bit. But I was just saying I was so not Machiavellian that I wish I was more normal Machiavellian, which I think you are. But the other part of this is like you would be at the table, it sounds like frequently, because I was talking, I think it only happened to me like a couple times. And I think it overall was probably a good parenting strategy to make it so that us four kids didn't complain all the time and learned to eat what, because if you've ever had a fussy kid when it comes to food, it can be, especially if you have multiple kids. If you have one kid that's fussy, it's so much easier because you just feed the kid what they like. But if you have more than one kid and each kid is fussy about different things, then you make 2 meals for 2 kids, you spend twice the amount of time or 3 times the amount of time if you have 3 kids. Like, that stuff's got to stop. And in my household, it was part of the method that they used. But anyway, so 90 Day Fiance, Georgia Nafisa number 21. Sasha says, I think the thing that might confuse people about this relationship, so I think Sasha's referring to how some people will be pro Anfisa. So Sasha, in terms of abusive behavior and not seeing it as abusive, Sasha says, I think the thing that might confuse people about this relationship is that George is so misogynistic, which one could argue is also abusive. Yeah, I could see that. Maybe that is part of it, is that especially when we meet him in the very beginning of the storyline, he just comes right out of the gate with some pretty misogynistic ideas, real classic misogynistic ideas. I mean, I think he was, and I reacted to it. I mean, I think I watched him for 15 seconds and talked for like 20 minutes about incels and MGTOW and misogyny and all that stuff. And because he was saying, like, I've tried to date American women, but they're so bossy all the time, and so I'm gonna date a woman from overseas because they're more controllable. And it's just like, are you sure about that? Anyway, so I think what happened was you see that scene and you just decide, oh, we know that sort of person, we hate him now. And so thus everything that Anfisa does is sort of slotted into that foundation, or is on top of that foundation. Lady says, listening to you speak numerous times about overfunctioning has forced me to evaluate my own parenting. Although I am a wonderful parent in many ways, I've also inadvertently made my teens highly dependent on their father and me, mostly me if I'm being honest. Along with their therapists and my own therapist, I'm working on backing off and making space for them to be more independent. I'm learning and growing, and you've been a big part of that, so thank you, Dr. Hada. Well, Lady Turner, I'm really glad that you're in therapy and you're working on that, and that you can recognize that in yourself. Now, I'm guessing for you, Lady Turner, it is a result of some relational traumas growing up. Often codependency and overfunctioning as a parent is because when we were young, we were forced to be responsible for other people prior to what we should have been. Making a 10-year-old over responsible for their children, or making a child responsible for their parents. And basically giving the message to that child that their only worth is by controlling others and keeping them safe, and that if they're not doing that, then they're failing and they're not lovable, and so there's other pathways to it. But I'm glad that you're able. And I'll tell you, Lady Turner, I've worked with a lot of parents who overfunction and are codependent, and it is one of the hardest things, one, to convince the parent of, and two, to get, even if they are convinced, to get them to change. I learned this early in my career because I worked really hard with this one mom and I can remember it, and I really like this family because the kids were half Asian actually, but I worked really hard because I'm half Asian, but I worked really hard with the mom to get her to understand that she was overfunctioning, enmeshed, codependent. And she eventually, after months and months and months of me really working on it and really trying to, in family therapy and individual therapy, Mom finally agrees. And then I'm like, oh, this is so great. Everything will change now. No, it didn't change. Just because she knew it and recognized it did not mean things changed. But you're actually, one, recognize it, which is a huge, you're already way above the curve. And two, you're actually working on it and changing it, which is, it's huge. Emily and Kobe, Gnome Child says, I think a big reason that people don't explain when triggered the situation during an apology is, I was talking about proper or effective apologies, a major component that's often ignored or misunderstood is providing an explanation, not an excuse. So they think, I think a big reason that people don't explain the situation during an apology is because of the culture we live in, where people automatically assume an explanation of behavior is always an excuse. I believe a lot of us have been burned one too many times to even go there, though. Thank you for being one of the ones to highlight how fundamental that component is to an effective apology. Yeah, so I'm learning more and more that in our society, we learn halfway and almost make it worse. So if I was to reduce this down to a simplistic narrative, I think what is happening is people would provide an excuse. They would say, well, look, I'm sorry that I did that to you, but I did that because and so they deflect and blame and minimize, and they provide an excuse. And then this heuristic is developed of just like, okay, anytime there's an excuse or anything that looks like an excuse, that is not okay. And then when you try to provide an explanation and you're truly sorry and remorseful and you're saying, let me tell you how I got there so that I can, one, help you understand why I would harm you in that way. Not because I just wanted to harm you, but there were these other reasons as to why they're still my responsibility. And I could actually work on those things so that I won't do that to you again. But people just have this heuristic of like, anytime there's an explanation or anything that looks like it, it's like bad and reject. And I think that's a problem, obviously. Vessi says, Dr. Honda, your approach on how to better apologize has been really insightful. Just recently, I had a misunderstanding with a friend, and I took all this into consideration. But the recipient of the apology is a stonewalling person. Is there a specific type of apology or approach you would recommend? I'm now trying to cope with the fact that my various apologies and vulnerability on them were dismissed, if not ignored. Yeah, so the key to understanding stonewalling, or people who stonewall, is that they are not doing it by choice entirely. They are overwhelmed. When we actually, John Gottman is the primary researcher and his colleagues regarding stonewalling in relationships, and they actually will hook up individuals to bio measures. And although on the outside, a stonewalling person might seem like they're indifferent, apathetic, aloof, arrogant, sure of themselves, rejecting, what's really happening for them is their biomarkers are through the roof, and their heart rate is up, their adrenaline is up, they're sweating more, they're having a fight or flight reaction. But they learned early in life to not reveal that externally, and the only way they can cope is, instead of because they have an urge to attack, and you'll even hear this from people who stonewall, they're like, well, I know that I need to back off, or I know I need to end this because bad things are going to happen. Not always, they don't always have that kind of awareness, but now, for most people who stonewall, they don't even know that they're having the internal reaction. All they know cognitively is, this is dumb, I'm going to turn away. But what's really happening is they are absolutely freaking out on the inside. And so when you understand that, it helps. Because if you just see it as an arrogant rejection, then it seems like it's a voluntary act. You're just like, why are you doing that? Stop, So, and when you attack or try to engage them, it makes them even more overwhelmed. It doesn't justify the stonewalling, but it's important to understand that. And so you're saying, I had a misunderstanding with a friend and took all this into consideration, but the recipient of the apology, so you're apologizing and then they stonewall you, and you're like, I feel like I was being dismissed. But again, it's probably not a conscious dismissal. They might even be stonewalling as an effort to preserve the relationship. It's not okay, but so the key, unless you go to therapy or they go to therapy or somehow they start to discover why they do this and have emotional regulation, corrective experiences, is you try to figure out why they are, what. So in your mind, go back in time and say, okay, if I was to take a guess as to if they stonewalled me when they were at a 9 out of 10 on the distress scale, what was the progression there? When I first came at them, what did I say that they might have misinterpreted, or they feel threatened? What brought them to a 5? What brought them to a 7? What brought them to a 9? When you understand that, then you might be able to account for it. So you can have a slower ramp up, or you can word things a little differently, or you can say things like, I want to apologize, but I also don't want to overwhelm you, and I want to say that I like you, and I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what to say, but that's what I will work on that with people, and that can work. But if they continue to stonewall and you don't really know why they're escalating, or they're just traumatized by any kind of relationship talk, then, it's hard to know what to do. Olivia says, well, so what I'll say finally, or at the end here, is that maybe not have a direct conversation, right? Maybe give them a chance to absorb, maybe through a well-written letter or something, so that maybe it'll be less overwhelming. I don't know. How to Meet Women episode, the update, audio episode. Olivia says, I clicked on this so fast. I've listened to the first episode multiple times, and I'm so proud of Basil's work. Yeah. Good old Abandonable Snowman says, the conversation around this always puts women on this pedestal, as if it's easy for all of us to meet partners. Yeah, so, the incel being to help you. Anyway, the conversation around this always puts women on a pedestal as if it's easy for all of us to meet partners, like they're clamoring at our feet and we pick our favorite. It's hard out there for everyone, and people of all genders experience rejection, loneliness, isolation, feeling awkward or inadequate, not knowing what to say, hot women included. It's so frustrating. Yeah, I think the misunderstanding emerges because of, I'm guessing not all of them have this experience, but we give all these messages to young men that in order to be a worthy guy, they have to bag a bunch of babes and they have to get, really hot women who will date them and be at their side and fawn over them. And so you pump that into their heads. These guys might be socially awkward. They enter the dating life and they just go straight for the hottest woman that they see. And then they get rejected, or even they get rejected in lieu of some other guy. And because of the way that they're doing it, like at a meat market kind of situation. And they are rejected. They do it a number of times. And then that becomes reality to them, that women and maybe those women in those meat markets do understand that they do kind of have their choice as to who they want to date, because a lot of people are coming up to them. Now, it's not usually the case, but you can see how someone might perceive it that way. And then they crawl back to their homes and go on the internet, and there's all these people saying the same thing. But it's because of what was injected into their head in terms of what the ideal is and the manner in which they actually tried to reach that goal. Whereas if they were just to talk to fellow humans and stop trying to get the hottest, most flashy woman to stand at their side and make them look like a real man, like they would have had different experiences and thus wouldn't have been rejected and thus wouldn't have gone to the internet and thus wouldn't have been in that echo chamber. I'm guessing that's a part of it, but yeah, I suspect there's a lot of guys who, and I know a lot of guys along because I treated a lot of them, where they didn't do it that misogynistic way. They're just regular guys with regular misogynistic ideas, but not like extreme. And they try to date, and they're not going to the meat markets and trying to look for the flashy people. But something goes wrong and they get rejected and they have relational trauma. Like, I'll give you a profile because I treated a number of men like this, where they grew up with a fair amount of awkwardness in their personality because their parents were a little awkward. So that was often one of the themes, was the parents had trouble with social situations. And then he would grow up and would be shy, wouldn't really date in high school, maybe a little bit here and there, but didn't really know what to do. Then gets older and starts saying, okay, we're in college or whatever, people start dating, okay, and they see like they don't really know, clearly other people know what to do and they don't really know what to do because they haven't really worked on those skills or whatever. And also rewinding the clock, when they were young, there was some kind of relational trauma that made them feel very rejectable, either an abandoning parent or abusive parent or neglectful parent or something, bullying, and they feel like there's something inherently wrong with them, but they aren't really aware of it. And so there's these ideas of like, well, you got to pump yourself up and you got to be alpha, and they feel like in that world, the incel red pill world, they talk more about alpha and beta than anyone else talks about it. Like the people they identify as being alphas, like they'll identify me as being alpha. I don't give a crap about alpha or betas. I don't see people that way. It's such a weird way of looking at the world, this constant power awareness or something, or framing everything in those terms. Plus, if I was quote unquote a beta in a social context, I don't care. In fact, I'd probably enjoy that so that other people could take over and I could relax a little bit. So this whole obsession with alpha and beta, if you don't know, alpha is supposed to be like the platonic ideal, the misogynistic ideal of a dude, right? So big and muscly and always in control and assertive, and women always want to be with them, and they make money and they're always on the move, and they don't take any guff, just all that kind of crap. And then the beta is the weak and please love me, and and the follower, and that kind of mindset. And so there's all this obsession around that. So I think that in all likelihood they had some kind of power traumas when they were growing up and were made to feel not truly a man or something, because there's all these ideas about it, to be a real man, to be a real human. If you are a man, boy, you have to be powerful and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so some kind of traumas about that. Then they enter the dating where they start dating. Things don't go well, and they just feel like something's wrong. And then these echo chambers play into all that of just like, I'm going to show you the way. I know that you're a beta, but we're going to make you an alpha, because that's how they feel, right? They feel like, and they're like, oh, if I could only be an alpha, if I could only not have these weaknesses, if I could only not feel vulnerable, if I could only not care about what other people think of me, if I could only, I would be the one in control and I would be the dominator, instead of getting out of that mindset, just like, don't be alpha or beta, just be yourself, find people who like you. Like, that's not the path. But because they're so obsessed, because they've been bullied or they've been abused or something, they're so obsessed with like, I don't want to be beta anymore, I don't want to be rejectable, and they overcompensate into this weird version of a human. I'm going to wear this weird hat and I'm going to act like I don't care and I'm going to bag all the babes. I mean, they literally will say in these communities, as soon as you have sex with her, you have to dump her, because if you allow yourself to be in a relationship with her, you are now beta to her. That kind of, it's like, huh? Like if I, anyway. So yeah, well, how did I get on that topic? Fiona Apple says, probably not the Fiona Apple, but if it is the Fiona Apple, love your music, actually. That first album I listened to that constantly. To the woman incel, I used to feel this way. So at the end, I read that, and I don't know if the woman was an incel, but, kind of in that direction. I struggled with borderline personality disorder and chose men that didn't care about me. I even started becoming racist internally, but I realized shitty people will exist, but good people also exist. Don't lose hope, people. It will take time. I am very happily engaged now. Yeah, good. Call Me Kirkland says, I can relate to a lot. I can relate a lot to not being able to meet women. I don't want to use dating apps, and I don't want to meet women at bars. I have a few friends, but they don't really have friend circles of their own. I'd love to put myself out there, but I have no idea where to do that. It's painful. Yeah. So first, Call Me Kirkland, just recognize that your pain is real. You're lonely, you feel rejected, you lack companionship, you wonder if you could ever meet someone or someone could ever love you romantically or sexually. That is painful, and that is real. And that's not wrong, and you're not an incel for feeling that pain and for getting frustrated. That is real, that is okay, that's common to people of all genders. It's not a man thing. It's a people thing, particularly today. People are more and more lonely. It's harder and harder, apparently, to meet people. It's not impossible, though, so there are ways to do it. And you say you don't want to use dating apps, okay. You don't want to meet women in bars, totally fine. Most people, if I remember right, meet people at work. A lot of not most, but a lot of people meet their partners at work or church or through friends. So this idea that you either use dating apps or meet women in bars is statistically not true. So now, I don't know what you're doing in life, but there's a lot of different things you can do. You can volunteer, like at a food bank or something. I mean, you could say, okay, I need to get out of the house. I don't want to do dating apps. I don't want to meet women in bars. Maybe I could volunteer. Maybe I won't meet someone volunteering, but maybe I'll start to socialize. Maybe I get invited to some birthday party and then I meet someone there and then we play tennis and, he sets me up with his friend and we start dating. And, you gotta be out there. A lot of people, what they'll do is, okay, I don't want to do dating apps. I don't want to meet women in bars. I'm going to just stay home and play video games all day. And why am I lonely? It's like, well, because you're literally not in the real world. Now, you can meet people online. You could be online playing video games with other people and meet those people, but you got to actually meet them. You can't just know them by their tag, by their name on the internet, right? What do you call it? The handle. You have to actually put effort. You have to put yourself out. Now, if you've been burned a lot, which you probably have, then therapy is in order. And really, I mean, I've worked with a lot of people in this situation where they need a lot of therapy to help them to feel okay with actually being able to engage in that kind of activity. But a lot of people, they just avoid the whole thing. And there's legitimate reasons as to why that happens. But then they will start to develop this narrative of just like, well, it's impossible to meet women these days. And there's plenty of non-incel internet communities where you will hear that. It's like, well, today it's just impossible. Or, the pandemic. It's like, no, it's just not true. Plenty of people are meeting people all the time, not in bars, not on dating apps. In fact, I think a statistic is even today, most new couples did not meet on dating apps. And I'm guessing some of those people met in bars, but I'm guessing the vast majority did not. I can't remember the exact stats, but there's a lot of people still meeting in the totally normal ways, at church, at work, online communities. You could do speed dating, couldn't hurt, right? That kind of thing. You could go to support groups. Maybe there's some kind of support group you want to go to. Now, don't be creepy, at work, for example, or at church. Don't just like start creeping on everyone all the time. But you meet people and maybe someone starts to, text you a little bit more often. And you're like, oh, okay, well, let's see where this goes. And, that's the way a lot of people meet. Or someone knows that you're single and you're looking and you're like, oh, I have a friend you might like. We try a blind date. Usually it doesn't go well. Sometimes it will. So you got to get out there, right? And now, if you're in a lot of pain and doing that is very, very hard, that's where therapy comes in. When you break your arm, you go to the ER. And when you have this problem, you go to therapy, not the internet. The internet is not your friend when it comes to this sort of thing because there's, one, multiple echo chambers that will prevent you from actually meeting your needs. And two, the internet is further away from humans. You can meet people online, though, so I'm not going to deny that. But if that's not working, then, real human experience, being in the same room as people, eye contact, laughing at jokes, vibe, chemistry, all that kind of thing. We need that as humans. So, anyway. Comments. Comments last week. Mel says, I'm the kind of person who shuts down. So I was talking about, people who shut down and how you might want to have other ways of trying to communicate because when there's a tense conversation, they go, and their body actually just freezes. I'm that kind of person who shuts down completely when my feelings are hurt because I'm not able to process the hurt into words. Your tip on texting or emailing is excellent. Sometimes that's the only way I can start a conversation about what's bothering me. I want to talk, but I physically can't get the words out. Texting to start a conversation isn't bad as long as it doesn't turn into a fight. Right. So texting to start a conversation might be really good if you are the sort of person that shuts down. Absolutely. But texting can lack nonverbals that are important, and misunderstandings can result in an escalation fight over texting. So, you got to be careful with that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, a viable model for a couple is they literally do all of their tense conversations over texting, and all of their apologies are over texting. And that's okay. It's communication. And, you look at that from the outside, you're like, well, that doesn't seem right. But for some people, that's all that they can handle. Now, in all likelihood, if you do that enough trust and corrective experience happens where you can actually have an in-person conversation. But anyway, Masha says, wristwatch revival is another soothing repair channel. Right. So I was talking in the last comments how I like this, the guitar repair, and I'm like, I don't even repair guitars, and I watched this one guy. But anyway, wristwatch revival. Okay, well, I have to check that out. Sounds interesting, right? Like fixing wristwatches. I know nothing about watches, but I can watch those videos for hours. And it's interesting about the guitar repair because there's a lot of guitar repair videos, but the one that I watch, it has a particular thing that I like that other channels don't really have. Anyway. Raymond says, did Dr. Honda really just react to a comment on a comments reaction video? That's meta AF. What's next? A comments reaction to this comments reaction video to that comments reaction video? Well, Raymond, it's not only meta AF, but it's meta AF. It's meta about, anyway. So, yes. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.